Hey, Kickin'. Good to see you. I'm so sorry I didn't give the hour warning that the stream was going to start. The Reel of Realms. Hey, Bright. Good to see you. Haven't seen you in a while. How have you been? I'll put up that screen. I forgot to give the hour warning on my Discord. I did on Twitter. And then, of course, my brain is like, well, obviously you've done it on Discord. Oh my gosh, thank you so much for the sub. We are on 6 months. How in the world? Oh, that's, wow. It's going good. Need to do a lot of cleaning today, but yeah. Yeah. I'm hoping that, we got rid of that. Ooh, thank you for the hydrate. Yeah, Red Bull. I was just telling my sister before we started that that you had tried Red Bull for the first time, so it's interesting because I had a coworker who loves Monster. So for a while, I would drink Monster because it was always at work. And I always kind of wonder why she hated Red Bull, because it tastes kind of like liquid Smarties. The Smarties are the little disc candies that are wrapped up like a log in cellophane, sort of wrapping. And it does. It kind of tastes like liquid Smarties. So, yeah. But I have been a long-time fan of it. Apparently, Neil Patrick Harris, when he was in How I Met Your Mother, because his character was always drinking Red Bull sent him a Red Bull cooler, like, one of those mini fridges. And I guess it was all filled with Red Bull or something. His family is so adorable. I don't know what his kids are like now that they're grown, but when he and his husband adopted the two kids, every Halloween they would just go all out on this family themed costume, like a whole family costume thing, and it's adorable. You should look up pictures of it. What? You started going outside. What's wrong, Kickin'? Yeah. And Monster's okay. I mean, I don't mind it. It is not as, I haven't, drunk Rockstar, but I have smelled enough Rockstar for it to be way too sweet for me. Oh, nice. Yeah, it's tapered off a little here. Every single day we're in the single digits, and then over the weekend is when we get our big double digit. They're still pretty consistently, we're always getting new cases, which of course is frustrating, but people are like, hey, we can go congregate. And it's like, of course, all you need is one person in a congregation of friends or family or whatever, and then everybody's got it, and then it spreads again. And so we'll see, we'll see if it has another spike. My coworker was saying the other day that she expects we'll probably have to wear masks through 2022. We'll see. I'm not as familiar with them as a band. I've found that I don't really like a lot of modern music. I do love good, not so much disco. I enjoy a little bit of disco, like classical rock and definitely jazz, like Dizzy Gillespie, old Brubeck, old Miles Davis, Jerry Mulligan I have discovered, because, you know, sometimes like Pandora, you'll put in an artist and they'll pull a lot of other artists that are similar to that artist. And I found if you put in Dave Brubeck or Miles Davis or, you know, one of the other, Dizzy Gillespie, and, you know, a lot of the other powerhouses in jazz, they do a lot of experimental jazz too. So you get a lot of experimental jazz, you get schmoozy jazz. But Jerry Mulligan is the era of jazz that I like. And so all of the other jazz artists that they pull stuff from those era, from that specific era of their stuff. So yeah. Original soundtracks. You never can go wrong with original soundtracks in my mind. Which interesting information, like an interesting little tidbit of info. Danny Elfman, who we mostly know for, you know, pairing up with Tim Burton, he was part of a rock, like a 70s, 80s rock sort of thing. He was with Oingo Boingo. Really weird stuff, really fun. Hip-hop, dubstep, clubland mixes, okay. I've heard a bit of club, but I don't know if that's the same as what you're talking about. Of course, I know hip hop, kind of like I like older hip hop. Dubstep, not so much. It's very overwhelming. Ooh, yes. 40s to 70s, so much. I love those eras. Yeah. I kind of grew up on that music from like those different eras because my mom liked the ones from the 40s and 50s. My dad was more 60s and 70s. Like Classical Gas, great song. You've got those songs that last for a whole album. So, you know, when you're listening to it on a record, it's really fun because you're halfway through the song and you have to turn over the record for the other half of the song. I don't remember who the artist was, but there was this one song, super long, and in the middle of it, all of a sudden, this guy starts narrating about the rabbit had lost his spectacles. Jethro Tull, thank you. So Jethro Tull is so bizarre, so fun. But then you've got like rock flute. And then I think there was like rock violin and stuff like that. So you get some really interesting, inventive stuff from the 70s. Let's see, Big Iron in the town of Sugar Free. Huh. I like that. That's interesting. If I can think of some of the other songs, I'll definitely try to put them on the music channel in the Discord. Definitely. Oh, yeah, I know. I turned autocorrect off of my computer because of that. And also, if I make a spelling mistake, I want to know that I've made a spelling mistake and not have it automatically overwrite my spelling mistake. Because, if it just automatically corrects it, how am I going to learn how to correctly do it myself? I know, I'm weird like that. I like to learn. Silliness. Well, shall we get started? This might turn out to be like a 5 story time book. Okay. I will go ahead and get started, and of course, you can get caught up like on the VOD or on YouTube or something like that, which I need to remember to put yesterday's story time on YouTube. Oh, that reminds me, I got a review on one of my YouTube videos. It was for the second story time of The Heroic Slave by Frederick Douglass. And it was from somebody saying that they were super glad that I had put it up because it helped them with their reading assignment. And that's like, I can't think of like a better compliment than that, because I love that, these can be helpful. Those were tough stories that we read last month, but really important, and I'm glad we read them. So anyways, let's go ahead and get started. So I will hide Maestro here. Chapter 7, The House in Soho. Whittington and his companion were walking at a good pace. Tommy started in pursuit at once, and was in time to see them turn the corner of the street. His vigorous strides soon enabled him to gain upon them, and by the time he, in his turn, reached the corner, the distance between them was sensibly lessened. The small Mayfair streets were comparatively deserted, and he judged it wise to content himself with keeping them in sight. The sport was a new one to him. Though familiar with the technicalities from a course of novel reading, he had never before attempted to follow anyone, and it appeared to him at once that, in actual practice, the proceeding was fraught with difficulties. Supposing, for instance, that they should suddenly hail a taxi. In books, you simply leapt into another, promised the driver sovereign, or its modern equivalent, and there you were. In actual fact, Tommy foresaw that it was extremely likely there would be no second taxi. Therefore, he would have to run. What happened in actual fact to a young man who ran incessantly and persistently through the London streets? In a main road, he might hope to create the illusion that he was merely running for a bus, but in these obscure aristocratic byways, he could not but feel that an officious policeman might stop him to explain matters. At this junction in his thoughts, a taxi with flag erect turned the corner of the street ahead. Tommy held his breath. Would they hail it? He drew a sigh of relief as they allowed it to pass unchallenged. Their course was a zigzagging one designed to bring them as quickly as possible to Oxford Street. When at length they turned into it, proceeding in an easterly direction, Tommy slightly increased his pace. Little by little he gained upon them. On the crowded pavement, there was little chance of his attracting their notice, and he was anxious, if possible, to catch a word or two of their conversation. All up Diamond City radio songs. In this he was completely foiled. They spoke low, and the din of the traffic drowned their voices effectually. Just before the Bond Street tube station, they crossed the road, Tommy, unperceived, faithfully at their heels, and entered the Big Lions. There they went up to the first floor and sat at a small table at the window. It was late, and the place was thinning out. Tommy took a seat at the table next to them, sitting directly behind Whittington in case of recognition. On the other hand, he had a full view of the second man and studied him attentively. He was fair, with a weak, unpleasant face, and Tommy put him down as being either a Russian or a Pole. He was probably about 50 years of age. His shoulders cringed a little as he talked, and his eyes, small and crafty, shifted unceasingly. You found a better way of doing what? I'm just going to pause really quickly. Get a drink. Having already lunched heartily, Tommy contented himself with ordering a Welsh rarebit and a cup of coffee. Whittington ordered a substantial lunch for himself and his companion. Then, as the waitress withdrew, he moved his chair a little closer to the table and began to talk earnestly in a low voice. The other man joined him. Listen as he would, Tommy could only catch a word here and there, but the gist of it seemed to be some directions or orders which the big man was impressing on his companion, and with which the latter seemed from time to time to disagree. Okay. Whittington addressed the other as Boris. Tommy caught the word Ireland several times, also propaganda, but of Jane Finn there was no mention. Suddenly, in a lull in the clatter of the room, he got one phrase entire. Whittington was speaking. "Ah, but you don't know Flossie. She's a marvel. An archbishop would swear she was his own mother. She gets the voice right every time, and that's really the principal thing." Tommy did not hear Boris's reply, but in response to it, Whittington said something that sounded like, "Of course, only in an emergency." Then he lost the thread again, but presently the phrases became distinct again, whether because the other two had insensibly raised their voices, or because Tommy's ears were getting more attuned, he could not tell. But two words certainly had a most stimulating effect upon the listener. They were uttered by Boris, and they were Mr. Brown. Whittington seemed to remonstrate with him, and he merely laughed. "Why not, my friend? It is a name most respectable, most common. Did he not choose it for that reason? Ah, I should like to meet him, Mr. Brown." There was a steely ring in Whittington's voice as he replied, "Who knows? You may have met him already." "Bah!" retorted the other. "That is children's talk, a fable for the police. Do you know what I say to myself sometimes? That he is a fable invented by the inner ring. A bogey to frighten us with. Might be so. And it might not. I wonder. Or is it indeed true that he is with us and amongst us, unknown to all but a chosen few? If so, he keeps his secret well, and the idea is a good one, yes. We never know. We look at each other. One of us is Mr. Brown. Which? He commands, but also he serves. Among us, in the midst of us, and no one knows which he is." With an effort, the Russian shook off the vagary of his fancy. He looked at his watch. "Yes," said Whittington, "we might as well go." He called the waitress and asked for his bill. Tommy did likewise, and a few moments later was following the two men down the stairs. Outside, Whittington hailed a taxi and directed the driver to Waterloo. Taxis were plentiful here, and before Whittington's had driven off, another was drawing up to the curb in obedience to Tommy's peremptory hand. "Follow that other taxi," directed the young man. "Don't lose it." The elderly chauffeur showed no interest. He merely grunted and jerked down his flag. The drive was uneventful. Tommy's taxi came to rest at the departure platform just after Whittington's. Tommy was behind him at the booking office. He took a first-class single to Bournemouth. Tommy did the same. As he emerged, Boris remarked, glancing up at the clock, "You are early. You have nearly half an hour." Boris's words had roused a new train of thought in Tommy's mind. Clearly, Whittington was making the journey alone, while the other remained in London. Therefore, he was left with a choice as to which he would follow. Obviously, he would not follow both of them unless... Like Boris, he glanced up at the clock and then to the announcement board of the trains. The Bournemouth train left at 3:30. It was now 10 past. Whittington and Boris were walking up and down by the bookstall. He gave one doubtful look at them, then hurried into an adjacent telephone box. He dared not waste time in trying to get hold of Tuppence. In all probability, she was still in the neighborhood of South Audley Mansions, but there remained another ally. He rang up the Ritz and asked for Julius Hersheimer. There was a click and a buzz. Oh, if only the young American was in his room! There was another click, and then, "Hello?" In unmistakable accents came over the wire. "That you, Hersheimer?" "Beresford speaking. I'm at Waterloo. I've followed Whittington and another man here. No time to explain. Whittington's off to Bournemouth by the 3:30. Can you get here by then?" The reply was reassuring. "Sure, I'll hustle." The telephone rang off. Tommy put back the receiver with a sigh of relief. His opinion of Julia's power of hustling was high. He felt instinctively that the American would arrive in time. Whittington and Boris were still where he had left them. If Boris remained to see his friend off, all was well. Then Tommy fingered his pocket thoughtfully. In spite of the carte blanche assured to him, he had not yet acquired the habit of going about with any considerable sum of money on him. The taking of the first-class ticket to Bournemouth had left him with only a few shillings in his pocket. It was to be hoped that Julius would arrive better provided. Hey, Maestro, you gonna come up? Hi. Or are you gonna go in your scratching pose? Why are you huffy? Hi. Just seeing if Maestro wants to get on my lap. No, he's just gonna sit there and be awkward. Let's see. In the meantime, the minutes were creeping by. 3:15, 3:20, 3:25, 3:27. Supposing Julius did not get there in time. 3:29. Doors were banging. Tommy could have felt cold waves of despair pass over him. Then a hand fell on his shoulder. "Here I am, son. Your British traffic beats description. Put me wise to the crooks right away." "That's Whittington. There, getting in now. That big dark man? The other is the foreign chap he's talking to." "I'm on to them. Which of the two is my bird?" Tommy had thought about this question. "Got any money with you?" Julius shook his head, and Tommy's face fell. "Well, I guess I haven't more than $300 or $400 with me at the moment," explained the American. Tommy gave a faint whoop of relief. "Oh, Lord, you millionaires, you don't talk the same language. Climb aboard the lugger. Here's your ticket. Whittington's your man." "Me for Whittington," said Julius darkly. The train was just starting as he swung himself aboard. "So long, Tommy." The train slid out of the station. Tommy drew a deep breath. The man, Boris, was coming along the platform towards him. Tommy allowed him to pass and then took up the chase once more. From Waterloo, Boris took the tube as far as Piccadilly Circus. Then he walked up Shaftesbury Avenue, finally turning off into the maze of mean streets round Soho. Tommy followed him at a judicious distance. They reached at length a small, dilapidated square. The houses there had a sinister air in the midst of their dirt and decay. Boris looked round, and Tommy drew back into the shelter of a friendly porch. The place was almost deserted. It was a cul-de-sac, and consequently no traffic passed that way. The stealthy way the other had looked round stimulated Tommy's imagination. From the shelter of the doorway, he watched him go up the steps of a particularly evil-looking house and rap sharply with a peculiar rhythm on the door. It was opened promptly. He said a word or two to the doorkeeper, then passed inside. The door was again shut. It was at this juncture that Tommy lost his head. What he ought to have done, what any sane man would have done, was to remain patiently where he was and wait for his man to come out again. What he did do was entirely foreign to the sober common sense which was, as a rule, his leading characteristic. Something, as he expressed it, seemed to snap in his brain. Without a moment's pause for reflection, he, too, went up the steps and reproduced as far as he was able the peculiar knock. The door swung open with the same promptness as before. A villainous-faced man with close-cropped hair stood in the doorway. "Well?" he grunted. It was at that moment that the full realization of his folly began to come home to Tommy, but he dared not hesitate. He seized at the first words that came to his mind. "Mr. Brown?" he said. To his surprise, the man stood aside. "Upstairs," he said, jerking his thumb over his shoulder. "Second door on your left." Chapter 8. The Adventures of Tommy. Taken aback though he was by the man's words, Tommy did not hesitate. If audacity had successfully carried him so far, it was to be hoped it would carry him yet further. He quietly passed into the house and mounted the ramshackle staircase. Everything in the house was filthy beyond words. The grimy paper, of a pattern now indistinguishable, hung in loose festoons from the wall. In every angle was a gray mass of cobwebs. Tommy proceeded leisurely. By the time he reached the bend of the staircase, he had heard the man below disappear into a back room. Clearly no suspicion attached to him as yet. To come to the house and ask for Mr. Brown appeared indeed to be a reasonable and natural proceeding. At the top of the stairs, Tommy halted to consider his next move. In front of him ran a narrow passage, with doors opening on either side of it. From the one nearest him, on the left, came a low murmur of voices. It was this room which he had been directed to enter. But what held his glance fascinated? What held his glance fascinated was a small recess immediately on his on his right, half concealed by a torn velvet curtain. It was directly opposite the left-hand door, and, owing to its angle, it also commanded a good view of the upper part of the staircase. As a hiding place for one, or, in a pinch, 2 men, it was ideal, being about 2 feet deep and 3 feet wide. It attracted Tommy mightily. He thought things over in his usual slow and steady way, deciding that the mention of Mr. Brown was not a request for an individual, but, in all probability, a password used by the gang. His lucky use of it had gained him admission. So far, he had aroused no suspicion, but he must decide quickly on his next step. Suppose he were boldly to enter the room on the left of the passage. Would the mere fact of his having been admitted to the house be sufficient? Perhaps a further password would be required, or, at any rate, some proof of identity. The doorkeeper clearly did not know all the members of the gang by sight, but it might be different upstairs. On the whole, it seemed to him that luck had served him very well so far, but that there was such a thing as trusting it too far. To enter that room was a colossal risk. He could not hope to sustain his part indefinitely. Sooner or later, he was almost bound to betray himself, and then he would have thrown away a vital chance in mere foolhardiness. A repetition of the signal sounded on the door below, and Tommy, his mind made up, slipped quickly into the recess and cautiously drew the curtains farther across so that it shielded him completely from sight. There were several rents and slits in the ancient material, which afforded him a good view. He would watch events, and any time he chose could, after all, join the assembly, modeling his behavior on that of the new arrival. The man who came up the staircase with a furtive, soft-footed tread was quite unknown to Tommy. He was obviously the very dregs of society. The low beetling brow and the criminal jaw, the bestiality of the whole countenance, were new to the young man, though he was of a type that Scotland Yard would have recognized at a glance. The man passed the recess, breathing heavily as he went. He stopped at the door opposite and gave a repetition of the signal knock. A voice inside called out something, and the man opened the door and passed in, affording Tommy a momentary glance of the room inside. He thought there must be about 4 or 5 people seated round a long table that took up most of the space, but his attention was caught and held by a tall man with close-cropped hair, and a short, pointed, navel-looking beard, who sat at the head of the table with papers in front of him. As the newcomer entered, he glanced up, and with a correct but cautiously precise enunciation, which attracted Tommy's notice, he asked, "Your number, comrade?" 14, Governor," replied the other hoarsely. "Correct." The door shut again. "If that isn't a Hun, I'm a Dutchman," said Tommy to himself, "and running the show darn systematically, too, as they always do. Luckily I didn't roll in. I'd have given the wrong number, and there would have been the deuce to pay. No, this is the place for me. Hello, there's another knock." This visitor proved to be of an entirely different type to the last. Tommy recognized him, an Irish Sinn Feiner. Certainly, Mr. Brown's organization was a far-reaching concern. The common criminal, the well-bred Irish gent, the pale Russian, and the efficient German master of the ceremonies. Truly a strange and sinister gathering. Who was this man who held in his fingers these curiously variegated links of an unknown chain? In this case, the procedure was exactly the same. The signal knock, the demand for a number, and the reply correct. 2 knocks followed in quick succession on the door below. The first man was quite unknown to Tommy, who put him down as a city clerk. A quiet, intelligent-looking man, rather shabbily dressed. The second was of the working classes, and his face was vaguely familiar to the young man. 3 minutes later came another, a man of commanding appearance, exquisitely dressed and evidently well-born. His face, again, was not unknown to the watcher, though he could not for the moment put a name to it. After his arrival, there was a long wait. In fact, Tommy concluded that the gathering was now complete, and was just cautiously creeping out from his hiding place when another knock sent him scuttling back to cover. This last comer came up the stairs so quietly that he was almost abreast of Tommy before the young man had realized his presence. He was a small man, very pale, with a gentle, almost womanish air. The angle of the cheekbones hinted at his Slavonic ancestry. Otherwise, there was nothing to indicate his nationality. As he passed the recess, he turned his head slowly. The strange light eyes seemed to burn through the curtains. Tommy could hardly believe that the man did not know he was there, and in spite of himself he shivered. He was no more fanciful than the majority of young Englishmen, but he could not rid himself of the impression that some unusually potent force emanated from the man. The creature reminded him of a venomous snake. A moment later his impression was proved correct. The newcomer knocked on the door as all had done, but his reception was very different. The bearded man rose to his feet, and all the others followed suit. The German came forward and shook hands. His heels clicked together. "We are honored," he said. "We are greatly honored. I much feared that it would be impossible." The others answered in a low voice that had a kind of hiss in it. "There are difficulties. It will not be possible again, I fear. But one meeting is essential. To define my policy, I could do nothing without. Mr. Brown, is he here?" The change in the German's air was audible as he replied with slight hesitation, "We have received a message. It is impossible for him to be present in person." He stopped, giving a curious expression of having left the sentence unfinished. A very slow smile overspread the face of the other. He looked round at a circle of uneasy faces. "Ah, I understand. I have heard of his methods. He works in the dark and trusts no one, but all the same, it is possible that he is among us now." He looked round him again, and again that expression of fear crept over the group. Each man seemed eyeing his neighbor doubtfully. The Russian tapped his cheek. "So be it. Let us proceed." The German seemed to pull himself together. He indicated the place he had been occupying at the head of the table. The Russian demurred, but the other insisted. "It is the only possible place," he said, "for number 1. Perhaps number 14 will shut the door." In another moment, Tommy was once more confronting bare wooden panels, and the voices within had sunk once more to a mere undistinguishable murmur. Tommy became restive. The conversation he had overheard had stimulated his curiosity. He felt that, by hook or by crook, he must hear more. There was no sound from below, and it did not seem likely that the doorkeeper would... "Oh, hello, Over. How are you doing? And thank you so much for the host. I hope you are enjoying. I'm just in the middle of the second chapter of this part. We're in the middle of chapter 8. And I do, of course, have the VOD. You can go and hear the first part of the story, and I'm going to be putting it on YouTube after today's stream. But thank you so much for the host, and welcome. Let's see, where am I? Aha, here we go. There was no sound from below, and it did not seem likely that the doorkeeper would come upstairs. After listening intently for a minute or two, he put his head round the curtain. The passage was deserted. Tommy bent down and removed his shoes. Then, leaving them behind the curtain, he walked gingerly out on his stockinged feet, and kneeling down by the closed door, he laid his ear cautiously to the crack. To his intense annoyance, he could distinguish little more. Just a chance word here and there if a voice was raised, which merely served to whet his curiosity still further. He eyed the handle of the door tentatively. Could he turn it by degrees so gently and imperceptibly that those in the room would notice nothing? He decided that with great care it could be done. Very slowly, a fraction of an inch at a time, he moved it round, holding his breath in his excessive care. A little more more still. Would it never be finished? Ah, at last it would turn no further. He stayed so for a minute or two, then drew a deep breath and pressed it ever so slightly inward. The door did not budge. Tommy was annoyed. If he had to use too much force, it would almost certainly creak. He waited until the voices rose a little, then he tried again. Still nothing happened. He increased the pressure. Had the beastly thing stuck? Finally, in desperation, he pushed with all his might, but the door remained firm. And at last the truth dawned upon him. It was locked or bolted on the inside. For a moment or two, Tommy's indignation got the better of him. "Hell, I'll be damned," he said. "What a dirty trick." As his indignation cooled, he prepared to face the situation. Clearly, the first thing to be done was to restore the handle to its original position. If he let it go suddenly, the men inside would be almost certain to notice it. So, with the same infinite pains, he reversed his former tactics. All went well, and with a sigh of relief, the young man rose to his feet. There was a certain bulldog tenacity about Tommy that made him slow to admit defeat. Checkmated for the moment, he was far from abandoning the conflict. He still intended to hear what was going on in the locked room. As one plan had failed, he must hunt about for another. He looked round him. A little further along the passage on the left was a second door. He slipped silently along to it. He listened for a moment or two, and then tried the handle. It yielded, and he slipped inside. The room, which was untenanted, was furnished as a bedroom. Like everything else in the house, the furniture was falling to pieces, and the dirt was, if anything, more abundant. But what interested Tommy was the thing he had hoped to find, a communicating door between the two rooms, up on the left by the window. Carefully closing the door into the passage behind him, he stepped across to the other and examined it closely. The bolt was shot across it. It was very rusty, and had clearly not been used for some time, but gently wiggling it to and fro, Tommy managed to draw it back without making too much noise. Then he repeated his former maneuvers with the handle, this time with complete success. The door swung open, a crack, a mere fraction, but enough for Tommy to hear what went on. There was a velvet portiere on the inside of this door, which prevented him from seeing, but he was able to recognize the voices with a reasonable amount of accuracy. The Sinfiner was speaking. His rich Irish voice was unmistakable. "That's all very well, but more money is essential. No money, no result." Another voice, which Tommy rather thought was that of Boris, replied, "Will you guarantee that there are results? In a month from now, sooner or later as you wish, I will guarantee you such a reign of terror in Ireland as shall shake the British Empire to its foundations." There was a pause, and then came the soft, sibilant accents of number one. "Good. You shall have the money. Boris, you will see to that." Boris asked a question. "The other Irish Americans, and Mr. Porter as usual?" "I guess that'll be all right," said a new voice with a transatlantic intonation. Though I'd like to point out here and now that things are getting a mite difficult. There's not the sympathy there was, and a growing disposition to let the Irish settle their own affairs without interference from America. Tommy felt that Boris had shrugged his shoulders as he answered, "Does that matter, since the money only nominally comes from the States?" "The chief difficulty is the landing of the ammunition," said the Sinn Feiner. "The money is conveyed in easily enough, thanks to our colleague here." Another voice, which Tommy fancied was that of the tall, commanding-looking man whose face had seemed familiar to him, said, "Think of the feelings of Belfast if they could hear you." "That is settled, then," said the sibilant tones. "Now, in the matter of the loan to an English newspaper, we have arranged the details satisfactorily, Boris?" "I think so." "That is good. An official denial from Moscow will be forthcoming if necessary." There was a pause, and then the clear voice of the German broke the silence. "I am directed by Mr. Brown to place the summaries of the reports from the different unions before you. That of the miners is most satisfactory. We must hold back the railways. There may be trouble with the ASE." For a long time there was a silence, broken only by the rustle of papers and an occasional word of explanation from the German. Then Tommy heard the light tap-tap of fingers drumming on the table. "And the date, my friend," said number one. "The 29th. The Russian seemed to consider. "That is rather soon." "I know, but it was settled by the principal labor leaders, and we cannot seem to interfere too much. They must believe it to be entirely their own show." The Russian laughed softly, as though amused. Yes, he said, "that is true. They must have no inkling that we are using them for our own ends. They are honest men, and that is their value to us. It is curious, but you cannot make a revolution without honest men. The instinct of the populace is infallible." He paused, and then repeated, as though the phrase pleased him, "Every revolution has had its honest men. They are soon disposed of afterwards." There was a sinister note in his voice. The German resumed. "Klimes must go. He is too far-seeing. Number 14 will see to that." There was a hoarse murmur. "That's all right, Governor." And then, after a moment or two, "Suppose I'm nabbed?" "You will have the best legal talent to defend you," replied the German quietly. "But in any case, you will wear gloves fitted with the fingerprints of a notorious housebreaker. You have little to fear." "Oh, I ain't afraid, Governor. All for the good of the cause. The streets is going to run with blood, so they say." He spoke with a grim relish. "Dreams of it sometimes I does, and diamonds and pearls rolling about in the gutter for everyone to pick up." Tommy heard a chair shifted. Then number one spoke. "Then all is arranged. You're assured of success?" I think so." But the German spoke with less than his usual confidence. Number one's voice held suddenly a dangerous quality. "What has gone wrong?" "Nothing, but what?" "The labor leaders. Without them, as you say, we can do nothing. If they do not declare a general strike on the 29th, why should they not? As you've said, they're honest, and in spite of everything we've done to discredit the government in their eyes, I'm not sure that they haven't got a sneaking faith and belief in it. But I know they abuse it unceasingly, but on the whole, public opinion swings to the side of the government. They will not go against it." Again the Russian's fingers drummed on the table. "To the point, my friend. I was given to understand that there was a certain document in existence which assured us success." "That is so. If that document were placed before the leaders, the result would be immediate. They would publish it broadcast throughout England and declare for the revolution without a moment's hesitation. The government would be broken finally and completely." "And what more do you want?" "The document itself," said the German bluntly. Ah, it is not in your possession? But you know where it is? No. Does anyone know where it is? One person? Perhaps, and we are not sure of that even. Who is this person? A girl. Tommy held his breath. A girl? The Russian's voice rose contemptuously. And you have not made her speak? In Russia, we have ways of making a girl talk. This case is different, said the German sullenly. How different? He paused a moment, then went on. Where is the girl now? The girl? Yes, she is... But Tommy heard no more. A crashing blow descended on his head, and all was darkness. Chapter 9. Tuppence enters domestic service. When Tommy set forth on the trail of the two men, it took all Tuppence's self-command to refrain from accompanying him. However, she contained herself as best she might, consoled by the reflection that her reasoning had been justified by events. The two men had undoubtedly come from the second-floor flat, and that one slender thread of the name Rita had set the young adventurers once more upon the track of the abduction of Jane Finn. The question was what to do next. Tuppence hated letting the grass grow under her feet. Tommy was amply employed, and, debarred from joining him in the chase, the girl felt at a loose end. She retraced her steps to the entrance hall of the mansions. It was now tenanted by a small lift boy who was polishing brass fittings and whistling the latest air with a good deal of vigor and a reasonable amount of accuracy. He glanced round at Tuppence's entry. There was a certain amount of the gammon element in the girl. In all the events of she invariably got on well with small boys. A sympathetic bond seemed instantly to be formed. She reflected that an ally in the enemy's camp, so to speak, was not to be despised. "Well, William," she remarked cheerfully, in the best approving hospital early morning style, "getting a good shine up?" The boy grinned responsively. "Albert, miss," he corrected. "Albert be it," said Tuppence. She glanced mysteriously round the hall. The effect was purposefully a broad one in case Albert should miss it. She leaned towards the boy and dropped her voice. "I want a word with you, Albert." Albert ceased operations on the fittings and opened his mouth slightly. "Look, do you know what it is?" With dramatic gestures, she flung back the left side of her coat and exposed a small, enameled badge. It was extremely unlikely that Albert would have any knowledge of it. Indeed, it would have been fatal for Tuppence's plans, since the badge in question was the device of a local training corps originated by the Archdeacon in the early days of the war. Its presence in Tuppence's coat was due to the fact that she had used it for pinning in some flowers a day or two before, but Tuppence had sharp eyes and had noted the corner of a threepenny detective novel protruding from Albert's pocket, and the immediate enlargement of his eyes told her that her tactics were good and that the fish would rise to the bait. "American Detective Force," she hissed. Albert fell for it. "Lord!" he exclaimed ecstatically. Tuppence nodded at him with the air of one who has established a thorough understanding. "Know whom I'm after?" she inquired genially. Albert, still round-eyed, demanded breathlessly, "One of the flats." Tuppence nodded and jerked a thumb up the stairs. "Number 20. Calls yourself Vandemeyer." "Vandemeyer! Ha ha!" Albert's hand stole to his pocket. "Crook?" he queried eagerly. "A crook? I should say so. Ready Rita, they call her in the States." "Ready Rita," repeated Albert deliriously. "Oh, ain't it just like the pictures?" It was. Tuppence was a great frequenter of the cinema. "And he always said as how she was a bad lot," continued the boy. "Who's Annie?" inquired Tuppence idly. "Our parlour maid, she's leaving today. Many's the time Annie's said to me, mark my words, Albert, I wouldn't wonder if the police was to come after her in one of these days. Just like that. But she's a stunner to look at, ain't she? She's some peach, allowed Tuppence carefully. Finds it useful in her layout, you bet. Has she been wearing any of the emeralds, by the way? Emeralds? Hem's the greenstones, isn't it? Tuppence nodded. That's what we're after her for. You know old man Rysdale? Albert shook his head. Peter B. Rysdale, the oil king? It seems sort of familiar to me. The sparklers belonged to him. Finest collection of emeralds in the world, worth $1 million. Lummy! Came ecstatically from Albert. It sounds more like the pictures every minute. Tuppence smiled, gratified at the success of her efforts. We haven't exactly proved it yet, but we're after her. And she produced a long, drawn-out wink. I guess she won't get away with the goods this time. Albert uttered another ejaculation, indicative of delight. Mind you, Sonny, not a word of this, said Tuppence suddenly. I guess I oughtn't to have put you wise, but in the States we know a real smart lad when we see one. I'll not breathe a word, protested Albert eagerly. Ain't there anything I could do? A bit of shadowing, maybe, or such like? Tuppence affected to consider, then shook her head. Not at the moment, but I'll bear you in mind, son. What's this about the girl you say is leaving? Annie? Regular turn-up they had. As Annie said, servants is somewhat nowadays, and to be treated accordingly, and, what with her passing the word round, she won't find it so easy to get another. Won't she? Said Tuppence thoughtfully. I wonder. An idea was dawning in her brain. She thought a minute or two, then tapped Albert on the shoulder. See here, son, my brain's got busy. How would it be if you mentioned that you'd got a young cousin or a friend of yours had that might suit the place? You get me? I'm there, said Albert instantly. You leave it to me, miss, and I'll fix the whole thing up in 2 ticks. Some lad, commented Tuppence with a nod of approval. You might say that the young woman could come right away, and let me know if it's A-OK. I'll be round tomorrow at 11 o'clock. Where am I to let you know? Ritz, replied Tuppence laconically. A name of Cowley. Albert eyed her enviously. Must be a good job, this tech business. It sure is, drawled Tuppence, especially when old man Rysdale backs the bill. But don't fret, son. If this goes well, you shall come in on the ground floor. With which promise she took leave of the new ally and walked briskly away from South Audley Mansions, well pleased with her morning's work. But there was no time to be lost. She went straight back to the Ritz and wrote a few brief words to Mr. Carter. Having dispatched this, and Tommy not having yet returned, which did not surprise her, she started off on a shopping expedition which, with an interval for tea and assorted creamy cakes, occupied her until well after 6 o'clock, and she returned to the hotel jaded, but satisfied with her purchases. Starting with the cheap clothing store and passing through 1 or 2 second-hand establishments, she had finished the day at a well-known hairdresser's. Now, in the seclusion of her bedroom, she unwrapped that final purchase. 5 minutes later, she smiled contentedly at her reflection in the glass. With an actress's pencil, she had slightly altered the lines of her eyebrows, and that, taken in conjunction with the new luxurious growth of fair hair above, so changed her appearance that she felt confident that even if she came face to face with Whittington, he would not recognize her. She would wear elevators in her shoes, and the cap and apron would be an even more valuable disguise. From hospital experience, she knew only too well that a nurse out of uniform is frequently unrecognized by her patients. Yes, said Tuppence aloud, nodding at the pert reflection in the glass, you'll do. She then resumed her normal appearance. Dinner was a solitary meal. Tuppence was rather surprised at Tommy's non-return. Julius, too, was absent, But that to the girl's mind was more easily explained. His hustling activities were not confined to London, and his abrupt appearances and disappearances were fully accepted by the young adventurers as part of the day's work. It was quite on the cards that Julius P. Hersheimer had left for Constantinople at a moment's notice if he fancied that a clue to his cousin's disappearance was to be found there. The energetic young man had succeeded in making the lives of several Scotland Yard men unbearable to them, and the telephone girls at the Admiralty had learned to know and dread the familiar "hello." He had spent 3 hours in Paris hustling the prefecture, and had returned from them imbued with the idea, possibly inspired by a weary French official, that the true clue to the mystery was to be found in Ireland. "I dare say he's dashed off there now," thought Tuppence. "All very well, but this is very dull for me. Here I am, bursting with news, and absolutely no one to tell it. Tommy might have wired or something. I wonder where he is. Anyway, he can't have lost the trail, as they say. That reminds me." And Miss Cowley broke off in her meditations and summoned a small boy. 10 minutes later, the lady was ensconced comfortably on her bed, smoking cigarettes and deep in the perusal of Barnaby Williams, the boy detective, which, with other threepenny works of lurid fiction, she had sent out to purchase. She felt, and rightly, that before the strain of attempting further intercourse with Albert, it would be as well to fortify herself with a good supply of local color. The morning brought a note from Mr. Carter. "Dear Miss Tuppence." Oh, is there a black screen? I'm so sorry. That's weird. I'm gonna try. Did it change here? I don't know how long ago you said that, Pete. I'm so sorry, but are you able to hear me? I was totally engrossed in the story. Oh, okay. But still black screen. That's really weird. Yeah, I know that it happened last week. Was it last week? But last week I had internet problems and I kept getting kicked off. Oh, that's weird. Huh. Well, I'm glad you've been enjoying it, though. It's a good thing to have on in the background, I think. Well, I'll go ahead and continue since we still have sound, which I'm glad about. I have my brand new Yeti Nano here, and so far it doesn't look like it's been giving me any problems. I also have a webcam, but I haven't set that up and started to play with it. Hopefully next weekend we'll have it up and about. All right, continuing. Dear Miss Tuppence, you have made a splendid start, and I congratulate you. I feel, though, that I should like to point out to you once more the risks you are running, especially if you pursue the course you indicate. Those people are absolutely desperate and incapable of either mercy or pity. I feel that you probably underestimate the danger, and therefore warn you again that I can promise you no protection. You have given us valuable information. If you choose to withdraw now, no one could blame you. At any rate, think the matter over well before you decide. If, in spite of my warnings, you make up your mind to go through with it, you will find everything arranged. You have lived for 2 years with Miss Dufferin, the parsonage, Llanelly, and Mr. Vandermeer, and Mrs. Vandermeer can apply to her for reference. May I be permitted a word or two of advice? Stick as near to the truth as possible. It minimizes the danger of slips. I suggest that you should represent yourself to be what you are, a former V.A.D. who has chosen domestic servants as a profession. There are many such at the present time. That explains away any incongruities of voice or manner which otherwise might awaken suspicion. Whichever you decide, good luck to you. Your sincere friend, Mr. Carter. Tuppence's spirits rose mercurially. Mr. Carter's warnings passed unheeded. The young lady had far too much confidence in herself to pay any heed to them. With some reluctance, she abandoned the interesting part she had sketched out for herself. Although she had no doubts of her own powers to sustain a role indefinitely, she had too much common sense not to recognize the force of Mr. Carter's arguments. There was still no word or message from Tommy, but the Morning Post brought a somewhat dirty postcard with the words, "It's okay," scrawled upon it. At 10:30, Tuppence surveyed with pride a slightly battered tin trunk containing her new possessions. It was artistically corded. It was with a slight blush that she rang the bell and ordered it to be placed in a taxi. She drove to Paddington and left the box in the cloakroom. She then repaired with a handbag to the fastnesses of the ladies' waiting room. 10 minutes later, a metamorphosed Tuppence walked demurely out of the station and entered a bus. It was a few minutes past 11 when Tuppence again entered the hall of South Audley Mansions. Albert was on the lookout, attending to his duties in a somewhat desultory fashion. He did not immediately recognize Tuppence. When he did, his admiration was unbounded. "Blessed if I had known you! That rig-out's top hole!" "Glad you like it, Albert," replied Tuppence modestly. "By the way, am I your cousin, or am I not?" "Your voice, too," said the delighted boy. "It's as English as anything. No, I said as a friend of mine knew a young gal, and he wasn't best pleased. She stopped on till today, to oblige, she said, but really it's so as to put you against the place." "Nice girl," said Tuppence. Albert suspected no irony. "She's style about'n her, keeps her silver a treat. But my word, ain't she got a temper. Are you going up now, miss? Step inside the lift. Number 20, did you say?" And he winked. Tuppence quelled him with a stern glance and stepped inside. As she rang the bell of number 20, she was conscious of Albert's eyes descending beneath the level of the floor. A smart young woman opened the door. "I've come about the place," said Tuppence. "It's a rotten place," said the young woman without hesitation. "Regular old cat, always interfering. Accused me of tampering with her letters. Me! The flap was half undone anyway. There's never anything in the new wastepaper basket. She burns everything. She's a wrong, and that's what she is. Swell clothes, but no class. Cook knows something about her, but she won't tell. Scared to death of her, and suspicious. She's on to you in a minute if you as much as speak to a fellow, I can tell you." But what more Annie could tell, Tuppence was never destined to learn, for at that moment a clear voice with a peculiar steely ring to it called, "Annie!" The smart young woman jumped as if she had been shot. "Yes, ma'am." "Who are you talking to?" "There's a young woman about the situation, ma'am." "Show her in then at once." "Yes, ma'am." Tuppence was ushered into a room on the right of the long passage. A woman was standing by the fireplace. She was no longer in her first youth, and the beauty she undeniably possessed was hardened and coarse. In her youth she must have been dazzling. Her pale gold hair, owing a slight assistance to art, was coiled low on her neck. Her eyes, of a piercing electric blue, seemed to possess a faculty of boring into the very soul of the person she was looking at. Her exquisite figure was enhanced by a wonderful gown of indigo charmeuse. And yet, despite her swaying grace and the almost ethereal beauty of her face, you felt instinctively the presence of something hard and menacing, a kind of metallic strength that found expression in the tones of her voice and in that gimlet-like quality of her eyes. For the first time, Tuppence felt afraid. She had not feared Whittington, but this woman was different. As if fascinated, she watched the long, cruel line of the red, curved mouth, and again she felt that sensation of panic pass over her. Her usual self-confidence deserted her. Vaguely, she felt that deceiving this woman would be very different to deceiving Whittington. Mr. Carter's warning recurred to her mind. Here, indeed, she might expect no mercy. Fighting down that instinct of panic which urged her to turn tail and run without further delay, Tuppence returned the lady's gaze firmly and respectfully. As though that first scrutiny had been satisfactory, Mrs. Vandermeer motioned to a chair. "You can sit down. How did you hear I wanted a house parlour-maid?" "Through a friend who knows the lift boy here. He thought the place might suit me." Again that basilisk gaze seemed to pierce her through. "You speak like an educated girl?" Glibly enough, Tuppence ran through her imaginary career on the lines suggested by Mr. Carter. It seemed to her, as she did so, that the tension of Miss Vandermeer's attitude relaxed. "I see," she remarked at length. "Is there anyone I can write to for a reference? I lived last with Miss Dufferin, the parsonage, Laneley. I was with her 2 years." "And then you thought you would get more money by coming to London, I suppose? Well, doesn't matter to me. I will give you £50, £60, whatever you want. You can come at once?" "Yes, ma'am, today if you like. My box is at Paddington." "Go and fetch it by taxi, then. It's an easy place. I'm out a good deal. By the way, what's your name?" "Prudence Coppers, ma'am." "Very well, Prudence. Go away and fetch your box. I shall be out to lunch. The cook will show you where everything is." "Thank you, ma'am." Tuppence withdrew. The smart Annie was not in evidence. In the hall below, a magnificent hall porter had relegated Albert to the background. Tuppence did not even glance at him as she passed meekly out. The adventure had begun, but she felt less elated than she had done earlier in the morning. It crossed her mind that if the unknown Jane Finn had fallen into the hands of Mrs. Vandermeer, it was likely to have gone hard with her. I'm really quickly going to take an Advil sinus, because my word, the allergens are bad today. So apologize for the little break. We're going to put Maestro back up here. I think Maestro is in his scratching post. Is really cute. All of a sudden, he has been all about his scratching post. It's gone for years unused, and I've taken to storing things in the little cubby, and then all of a sudden a couple of months ago he just decided he wanted to be inside it, so I had to vacate everything from out of there. Oh well. And I think there is something back here. Oh, yeah, there you are. All right, there we go. Hiding Maestro again. Chapter 10. Enter Sir James Peel Edgerton. Tuppence betrayed no awkwardness in her new duties. The daughters of the Archdeacon were well groomed in household tasks. They were also experts in training a raw girl, the inevitable result being that the raw girl, once trained, departed somewhere where her newly acquired knowledge commanded a more substantial remuneration than the Archdeacon's meagre purse allowed. Tuppence had therefore very little fear of proving inefficient. Mrs. Vandermeer's cook puzzled her. She evidently went in deadly terror of her mistress. The girl thought it possible that the other girl had some hold over her. For the rest, she looked like a chef, as Tuppence had an opportunity of judging that evening. Mrs. Vandermeyer was expecting a guest at dinner, and Tuppence accordingly laid the beautifully polished table for two. She was a little exercised in her own mind as to this visitor. It was highly possible that it might prove to be Whittington, although she felt fairly confident that he would not recognize her, yet she could have been better pleased had the guest proved to be a total stranger. However, there was nothing for it but to hope for the best. At a few minutes past 8, the front door bell rang, and Tuppence went to answer it with some inward trepidation. She was relieved to see that the visitor was the second of the two men whom Tommy had taken upon himself to follow. He gave his name as Count Stepanoff. Tuppence announced him, and Mrs. Vandermeyer rose from her seat in a low divan with a quick murmur of pleasure. "It is delightful to see you, Boris Ivanovitch," she said. "And you, madame." He bowed low over her hand. Tuppence returned to the kitchen. Count Stepanov, for some such, she remarked, and affecting a frank, unvarnished curiosity. "Who's he?" "Russian gentleman, I believe." "Come here much?" "Once in a while." "What do you want to know for?" "Fancied he might be sweet on the miss, that's all," explained the girl, adding with an appearance of sulkiness, "How you do take one up." "I'm not quite easy in my mind about the souffle," explained the other. "You know something," thought Tuppence to herself, but aloud she only said, "Going to dish up now? Right-o." Whilst waiting at a table, Tuppence listened closely to all that was said. She remembered that this was one of the men Tommy was shadowing when she had last seen him. Already, although she would hardly admit it, she was becoming uneasy about her partner. Where was he? Why had no word of any kind come from him? She had arranged before leaving the Ritz to have all letters or messages sent on at once by special messenger to a small stationer's shop near at hand, where Albert was to call infrequently. True, it was only yesterday morning that she had parted from Tommy, and she told herself that any anxiety on his behalf would be absurd. Still, it was strange she had sent no word of any kind. But listen as she might, the conversation presented no clue. Boris and Mrs. Vandermeyer talked on purely indifferent subjects. Plays they had seen, new dances, the latest society gossip. After dinner they repaired to the small boudoir, where Mrs. Vandermeyer, stretched on the divan, looked more wickedly beautiful than ever. Tuppence brought in the coffee and liqueurs, and unwillingly retired. As she did so, she heard Boris say, "New, isn't she?" "She came in today. The other was a fiend. This girl seems all right. She waits well." Tuppence lingered a moment longer by the door, which she had carefully neglected to close, and heard him say, "Quite safe, I suppose?" "Really, Boris, you are absurdly suspicious. I believe she is the cousin of the hall porter or something of the kind, and nobody even dreams that I have any connection with our mutual friend, Mr. Brown." "For heaven's sake, be careful, Rita. That door isn't shut." "Well, shut it then," laughed the woman. Tuppence removed herself speedily. She dared not absent herself longer from the back premises, but she cleared away and washed up with a breathless speed acquired in hospital. Then she slipped quietly back to the boudoir door. The cook, more leisurely, was still busy in the kitchen, and if she missed the other, would only suppose her to be turning down the beds. Alas, the conversation inside was being carried on in too low a tone to permit of her hearing anything of it. She dared not reopen the door, however gently. Mrs. Vandermeyer was sitting almost facing it, and Tuppence respected her mistress's lynx-eyed powers of observation. Nevertheless, she felt she would give a good deal to overhear what was going on. Possibly, if anything unforeseen had happened, she might get news of Tommy. For some moments she reflected desperately. Then her face brightened. She went quickly along the passage to Mrs. Vandemeyer's bedroom, which had long French windows leading on to the balcony that ran the length of the flat. Slipping quietly through the window, Tuppence crept noiselessly along till she reached the boudoir window. As she had thought it still little ajar, and the voices within were plainly audible. Tuppence listened attentively, but there was no mention of anything that could be twisted to apply to Tommy. Mrs. Vandemeyer and the Russian seemed to be at a variance over some matter, and finally the latter exclaimed bitterly, "With your persistent recklessness, you will end by ruining us." "Bah!" laughed the woman. "Notoriety of the right kind is the best way of disarming suspicion. You will realize that one of these days, perhaps sooner than you think. In the meantime, you are going about everything with Peel Egerton. Not only is he, perhaps, the most celebrated K.C. in England, but his special hobby is criminology. It is madness." "I know that his eloquence has saved untold men from the gallows," said Mrs. Vandemeyer calmly. "What of it? I may need his assistance in that line myself some day. If so, how fortunate to have such a friend at court. Or perhaps it would be more to the point to say in court." Boris got up and began striding up and down. He was very excited. "You are a clever woman, Rita, but you are also a fool. Be guided by me, and give up Peel Egerton." Mrs. Vandemeyer shook her head gently. "I think not." "You refuse?" There was an ugly ring in the Russian voice. "I do." "You refuse?" "Oh, oops. I reread that. My bad. I thought he was just saying it again for effect." "You refuse?" "I do." "Then by heaven," snarled the Russian, "we will see." But Mrs. Vandemeyer also rose to her feet, her eyes flashing. "You forget, Boris," she said. "I am accountable to no one. I take my orders only from Mr. Brown." The other threw up his hands in despair. "You are impossible," he muttered. "Impossible! Already it may be too late. They see Peel Egerton can smell a criminal. How do we know that it is at the bottom of this sudden interest in you? What is at the bottom of this sudden interest in you? Perhaps even now his suspicions are aroused. He guesses." Mrs. Vandemeyer eyed him scornfully. "Reassure yourself, my dear Boris. He suspects nothing. With less than your usual chivalry, you seem to forget that I am commonly accounted a beautiful woman. I assure you that is all that interests Peel Egerton." Boris shook his head doubtfully. "He has studied crime as no other man in his kingdom has studied it. Do you fancy that you can deceive him?" Mrs. Vandemeyer's eyes narrowed. "If he is all that you say, it would amuse me to try." "Good heavens, Rita! Besides," added Mrs. Vandemeyer, "he is extremely rich. I'm not one who despises money. The sinews of war, you know, Boris. Money, that is always the danger with you, Rita. I believe you would sell your soul for money. I believe—" He paused. Then in a low, sinister voice, he said slowly, "Sometimes I believe that you would sell us." Mrs. Vandemeyer smiled and shrugged her shoulders. "The price, at any rate, would have to be enormous," she said lightly. "It would be beyond the power of anyone but a millionaire to pay." "Ah," snarled the Russian, "you see I was right." "My dear Boris, can you not take a joke?" "Was it a joke?" "Of course. And all I can say is that your ideas of humor are peculiar, my dear Rita." Mrs. Vandemeyer smiled. "Let us not quarrel, Boris. Touch the bell. We will have some drinks." Tuppence beat a hasty retreat. She paused a moment to survey herself in Mrs. Vandemeyer's long glass and be sure that nothing was amiss with her appearance. Then she answered the bell demurely. The conversation that she had overheard, although interesting in that it proved beyond doubt the complicity of both Rita and Boris, threw very little light on the present preoccupations. The name of Jane Finn had not even been mentioned. The following morning, a few brief words with Albert informed her that nothing was waiting for her at the stationer's. It seemed incredible that Tommy, if all was well with him, should not send any word to her. A cold hand seemed to close round her heart. Supposing... She choked her fears down bravely. It was no good worrying, but she leapt at a chance offered her by Mrs. Vandemeyer. "What day do you usually go out, Prudence?" "Friday's my usual day, ma'am." Mrs. Vandemeyer lifted her eyebrows. "And today is Friday, but I suppose you hardly wish to go out today, as you only came yesterday." "I was thinking of asking you if I might, ma'am." Mrs. Vandemeyer looked at her a minute longer, and then smiled. "I wish Count Stepanoff could hear you. He made a suggestion about you last night." Her smile broadened, cat-like. "Your request is very typical. I am satisfied. You do not understand all this, but you can go out today. It makes no difference to me, as I shall not be dining at home." "Thank you, ma'am." Tuppence felt a sensation of relief once she was out of the other's presence. Once again, she admitted to herself that she was afraid, horribly afraid, of the beautiful woman with the cruel eyes. In the midst of a final desultory polishing of her silver, Tuppence was disturbed by the ringing of the front door bell, and went to answer it. This time the visitor was neither Whittington nor Boris, but a man of striking appearance. Just a shade over average height, he nevertheless conveyed the impression of a big man. His face, clean-shaven and exquisitely mobile, was stamped with an expression of power and force far beyond the ordinary. Magnetism seemed to radiate from him. Tuppence was undecided for the moment whether to put him down as an actor or a lawyer, but her doubts were soon solved as he gave her his name, Sir James Peel Egerton. She looked at him with renewed interest. This was the famous K.C. whose name was unfamiliar all over England. She had heard it said that he might one day be Prime Minister. He was known to have refused office in the interests of his profession, preferring to remain a simple member of a Scotch constituency. Tuppence went back to her pantry thoughtfully. The great man had impressed her. She understood Boris's agitation. Peel Egerton would not be an easy man to deceive. In about a quarter of an hour the bell rang, and Tuppence repaired to the hall to show the visitor out. He had given her a piercing glance before. Now, as she handed him his hat and stick, she was conscious of his eyes raking her through. As she opened the door and stood aside and let him pass out, he stopped in the doorway. "Not been doing this long, eh?" Tuppence raised her eyes, astonished. She read in his glance kindness, and something else more difficult to fathom. He nodded as though she had answered. "VAD and hard up, I suppose." "Did Miss Vandemeyer tell you that?" asked Tuppence suspiciously. "No, child, the look of you told me." "Good place here?" "Very good, thank you, sir." "Ah, but there are plenty of good places nowadays, and a change does no harm sometimes." "Do you mean—" began Tuppence, but Sir James was already on the topmost stair. He looked back with his kindly, shrewd glance. "Just a hint," he said. "That's all." Tuppence went back to the pantry more thoughtful than ever. I know we still have a half an hour, but I have started to feel a bit not good, so I'm going to go ahead and end the stream here. Do any of you have any suggestions for who we might raid? I think usually Swags is streaming about now, so let's take a look. Oh, that's right. He usually starts at 4 my time, which it's not quite. Yeah, thank you, Pete, for hanging out with me. Let's see. Let us raid Shiny. I think that's who we're going to raid. Alright, let's see. Getting the raid ready, raid message ready. Let's see, here we go. Thank you again for hanging out with me. I hope to see you next time. Next stream is going to be on Saturday. Yeah, the raid message is this one right here. Anyways, I hope you have a great week, and I will see you next time. Bye.
You're on right now.